On Christmas Eve 1914, the shooting simply stopped. Not everywhere, and not on anyone's orders. But along parts of the Western Front, men who had spent months trying to kill each other put down their rifles, climbed out of the trenches and walked into the open to shake hands. We call it the Christmas Truce, and it's one of the most famous moments of the entire war. It's also one of the most misremembered, but this story is different from most war stories because we don't have to guess. We don't have to trust a movie. Thousands of the men who were there wrote it down that same week, in letters home and in diaries. So today we do something simple. We read their actual words. And we watch the famous version, the one with the organized match and the final score, quietly come apart, one line at a time.
I'm Erica, and it started with sound. On Christmas Eve, the British in their trenches heard the Germans across the way singing.
Michael here. Take the distance between the two front lines. In places, it was 30 yards. That's the length of a swimming pool. Close enough to hear every carol, every word, every laugh.
I'm May, almost peaceful, and that's the strange part. Listen to what they were singing. The Germans start a carol, and the British recognize the tune, since it's the same carol they know back home in another language. Stille Nacht, Silent Night, same melody on the same night, two sets of freezing trenches 30 yards apart. One side sings a verse, the other answers. That's not a ceasefire yet. It's two exhausted armies discovering in the dark that they're humming the exact same song.
Okay, and this is the detail I want everyone to hold on to. Nobody up the chain of command started this. The generals didn't sign off on it. It bubbled up from the bottom, from the men standing in the mud.
A German voice put it plainly. One soldier called across in broken English, "Tomorrow you no shoot, we no shoot."
And somebody has to move first. Somebody has to be the one who actually stands up in the open, where a single rifle shot could end him. Who does that?
That's the moment I can't stop thinking about. On Christmas morning, in a few sectors, a handful of men climbed up over the parapet. Unarmed, they started walking toward the guns that had been firing at them the night before.
This is what it looked like when they met.
Look at that. British caps on one side, German spiked helmets on the other, a little tree in the snow, cigarettes and buttons changing hands. This drawing ran in a London newspaper in January 1915, and people at home thought it had to be made up.
This is the question everyone types under a video like this one. Did enemy soldiers really call a truce and play a football match on Christmas, or is that a myth? Short answer. The truce is real, rock solid, hundreds of first-hand accounts. The football match with the final score is where it gets slippery, and that gap between the two is the whole episode.
So we take it in order. First, why this happened at all. Then how far it really spread. And only after that, the letters, where the legend meets the record. Start with the why. Nobody ordered this. That's the first thing to get straight because it changes what the truce actually was.
Everyone had been promised this war would be over by Christmas. It wasn't. So instead you had young men in their first winter, sitting in flooded trenches. Cold and homesick, 30 yards from other young men in the same state.
The way it spread is the part that gets me. Picture how I hear it. I paint bridges to jazz on vinyl at home, and this has the same shape as a jazz set, not a symphony. Nobody handed out sheet music. One player starts a phrase. Somebody across the room hears it and answers. A third picks it up, and suddenly the whole room is playing a song that nobody wrote down and nobody conducted. That is exactly how the truce moved. One trench, then the next, then the next, each improvising off the sound of the last.
Right, but somebody tried to make it official first, didn't they? Higher up?
One person did. Pope Pius asked both governments to stop the guns for Christmas. On the 7th of December,
Pope Benedict XV. Pius was the one before him.
Benedict XV, 7th of December. It's correct, and I hate that you caught it that fast. The point stands. The Pope begged for a truce, and both governments said no.
Okay, and this is where I want to stop us. People keep saying the Christmas truce, like it was one thing. One event, one big handshake. I don't think the record supports that.
You think it was smaller than that?
I think it was a patchwork of separate ones, sector by sector, and I'm not letting go of that until someone who's read the sources backs me up. It matters. A single truce sounds coordinated. A scatter of local ones sounds like something no one could control. Let's ask.
Good instinct, I've got just the person. Ruth, are you with us?
I'm here, and Nora's right to dig in on that word. There was no single truce. It was a patchwork of local ones breaking out sector by sector, each arranged by the men standing in that particular stretch of line. No central plan, no signed agreement.
Ruth, that raises the thing I keep snagging on. If nobody ordered the truce, what stopped the next trench over from just opening fire on the crowd?
Nothing did in some places. That's the hard part people leave out. In one sector, men were shaking hands, and a few hundred yards away, another unit, who never got the word, opened fire on Christmas Day. The truce was never universal. Each sector was its own small world, and some of them stayed at war the whole time.
This is a photo of one of those small worlds where it worked. Real men, real faces.
British caps, German coats, standing in the same muddy field. Ruth, thank you. So the picture is a patchwork, not a wave.
Let me pause for just a second, because this genuinely helps. If you are getting value here, hit that like button, then subscribe and ring the bell. It costs you nothing, and it is the single biggest thing that keeps these videos coming.
Here's the ruling that reframes everything. The question isn't whether the truce happened, it did. The real question is how much of the war actually stopped.
Say more, because I think most people picture the whole front going silent.
Most people do, and that picture is too big. Once you ask how much, the story shrinks to something more honest.
So let's turn that into a real number, because it's the question everyone asks. How much of the whole Western Front actually stopped fighting that Christmas? Everyone at home, play along. The front held well over 1 million men. Take a guess. Over or under 500,000 joined the truce?
Over. Has to be over. The story is everywhere. Everybody's granddad has a version of it. I'll say 600,000 easy.
Michael, about 100,000.
100,000. Out of over 1 million? Okay, that changes how I've pictured this my whole life. That's not the front laying down its arms. That's a corner of it.
A real corner, though. 100,000 men is not nothing.
But where was that corner? That's what surprised me.
One stretch of Flanders, mostly. Nora, put it on the map for them.
This is it, right here, this strip of Flanders. British trenches facing German ones, and very often the Germans across the way were Saxons, who had a reputation for being friendlier than the Prussian units. This little corner is where a lot of it happened.
Take the French sectors, though. Different story on the ground entirely.
Very different. The French were fighting on their own invaded soil, with occupied towns at their backs. Far more anger, far less singing. The truce barely touched most of their line.
That reframes it for me. And honestly, with my first kid on the way and the crib half built in the garage, I keep thinking these were mostly kids too. 100,000 of them decided, in their little corner, that for one day they were fathers and sons again, not targets.
So that's the honest scale. Not a silent front. A patchwork of quiet corners, biggest where the British and the Saxons faced off. Which brings us to the thing that corner is most famous for, and most wrong about. Wait until you hear where that famous 3-2 score actually came from. This is the part I promised you at the start, the football. And this is where we stop telling you the story and start reading you the evidence, because the words the soldiers actually wrote are right here.
Good. Then don't paraphrase it. Read me the actual line. Somebody kept a diary that night. What does it literally say?
A German lieutenant named Kurt Siemisch in his diary. His words. The English brought a soccer ball from their trenches, and pretty soon a lively game ensued.
Okay, so a game happened. That's real. What did it look like on the ground?
The British soldier who was actually in it said the same thing. Ernie Williams, in his own words years later. He said it was a proper football, a real ball, but listen to the next part. He said, "We didn't form a team. It wasn't a team game in any sense of the word. It was a kickabout, everybody having a go, no referee and no score. Picture a couple hundred lads mobbing one ball across a frozen field. That's the real scene."
So where on earth does 3-2 come from? Every retelling has that exact score.
One place. A letter in the Times, 1st of January, 1915, from an army doctor who didn't sign his name. He wrote that a regiment, and he didn't even name which, had a football match with the Saxons, who beat them 3-2.
Wait, the famous score is from one anonymous letter? Unsubstantiated?
Unsubstantiated, anonymous, no unit named. There is a German memoir years later that also claims 3-2 from an officer in the 130th. Let me get this right, the 133rd Saxon Regiment. But the British battalion war diaries for that day record no such match.
And this is the thing that flips it for me. Line up the evidence side by side. Every first-hand voice that was actually in a game says the same thing. Siemisch, Williams, the diaries, a wild kickabout with no teams and no score. The only place a tidy 3-2 lives is one anonymous newspaper letter and one late memoir. That is not a match report. That is a rumor that got a scoreboard bolted onto it afterward.
Okay, you got me, May. I came in fully believing there was a real match with a real score. There wasn't. There was a kickabout, and a good story grew a scoreboard.
Here's the clean version of that.
And here's the ruling, and it isn't a takedown. Both things are true. The football was real, and the tidy little match with the final score was not. We don't have to throw out the moment to throw out the myth.
That's the loop I opened at the very start, closed by the letters themselves. And honestly, the truth is the stronger story. A frozen mob of exhausted kids chasing one ball beats a neat scoreline every time. But the football was never the real reason they crossed the wire. The reason is quieter, and it's next. We remember the carols and the football, but the reason many of these truces happened at all was quieter and much harder. It was the dead.
The bodies in no man's land. Men killed in the autumn attacks, lying in the open between the lines for weeks. You couldn't reach them under fire, so they stayed where they fell.
And that need is its own kind of gravity. Both sides were looking at the same ground, at friends they couldn't bring in, close enough to see and impossible to reach. A truce didn't have to be about brotherhood to make sense. Sometimes two enemies simply agreed, quietly, that the men in the middle deserved to come out of the mud and into a grave. That is not sentiment. That is the oldest decency there is.
And on the ground, what did that actually look like?
This is what it looked like.
A cross in the churned ground, British soldiers standing over a fresh grave, and Germans doing the same a few yards off. In some sectors, they held joint services. One chaplain, sometimes a German divinity student, reading alongside, the same psalms over both sides dead.
And that shared work is what let the rest happen. You cannot bury a man's friends beside your own, and then, an hour later, pretend he isn't a person. The burials came first. The handshakes and the singing followed from them.
So when you strip away the movie version, the beating heart of the Christmas truce isn't a football at all. It's two enemies, heads bowed over the same graves, agreeing for one day that the dead came first. Hold that, because it makes what happened next even harder.
Here's the part that stings. It wasn't the men who ended the truce. It was the institutions above them on both sides, and they moved fast.
Yeah, The generals had one fear driving all of it. An army that fraternizes with the enemy is an army that might stop fighting.
Erica, name names. Who actually gave the order?
On the British side, this man, General Sir Horace Smith-Dorrien, commanding the Second Corps, he issued orders forbidding friendly communication with the German troops.
Crucially, this wasn't a one-sided crackdown, which is the part that keeps it honest. The German High Command did exactly the same thing. A general order went out on the 29th of December, warning German troops that every approach to the enemy would be punished as treason. Two enemies who agreed on almost nothing agreed completely on this one point. The friendship had to stop.
And they didn't even leave the next Christmas to chance.
No. By the winter of 1915, commanders issued orders to forestall any repeat, and they timed artillery barrages for Christmas Day itself to make it as hard as possible for the guns to fall silent again.
They shelled Christmas on purpose.
On purpose, and mostly it worked. There were still a few quiet spots here and there the next year, but nothing on the scale of 1914 ever came back.
And the men who tried it anyway the next year, did anyone actually get punished?
One did. When a company commander allowed a burial truce the next Christmas anyway, he was court-martialed for it, found guilty, reprimanded. Then the punishment was annulled by Haig himself. But the message to everyone else was received.
So the honest lesson isn't that soldiers are secretly gentle or that generals are secretly cruel. It's that the men in the mud found a small human peace, and the machinery of the war could not survive it, so the machinery ended it. That's the system talking, not any one villain. So what did one Christmas actually leave behind? Not a repeat. 1914 was the only time it happened on anything like this scale, and we just saw why. It was engineered out of existence.
But it left a memory the armies couldn't shell away. And here's the ruling on why it lasted. Not because of the football, because of the choice underneath it.
This is the memorial they built for it. 2 hands clasped inside a football.
Football remembers, it says. Circle the date it honors, the 25th of December 1914. A handshake wrapped in a game.
Bit ironic, isn't it? A football monument after we just gutted the match.
Fair, but the football's the door, not the room. It gets you to the real thing, that clasped hand.
It's the same shape as almost every myth worth checking. You pull the exaggeration out, the neat scoreline, the single grand truce, and you brace for the story to collapse. It doesn't. It gets smaller and truer at the same time, and the truer version hits harder than the myth ever did.
So here's the honest verdict, and I want to be fair to both readings of this. One side romanticizes it. Peace broke out, humanity won. The other says it was tiny and brief. 100,000 men out of millions, snuffed out in a week. It changed nothing about the war.
Both are right, which is the honest answer. It changed nothing strategically. And it proved something anyway. That the hatred was issued from above, not felt from below. The men had to be ordered to keep killing each other.
And Erica, one more thing for the record. Benedict XV, still the right pope.
I'm never living that down. Fair.
Here's where I land. For one day, 100,000 men looked across 30 yards of frozen mud, decided the guns were a lie somebody else was telling, and walked out to prove it. It took a whole war machine to talk them back into it. That is not a small story. That is the biggest thing the truce actually says.
Quick gut check before I recap. Without scrolling back, what's the one thing about the Christmas truce you'll correct a friend on now? Mine's the score. There was a real kickabout, and there was never a real 3-2.
Next time, we stay in these same trenches but follow the thing that made this war so deadly. 1915. The first great gas cloud rolls across no man's land, and the war finds a new kind of horror. Same approach, the record over the legend.
The lesson here is small, and it outlasts the war. When a story carries one suspiciously clean detail, a final score, a single grand event, that clean detail is usually what someone added later. The messy version is almost always the true one.
My favorite piece was the jazz of it. Nobody conducted the truce. It spread trench to trench, each one answering the last, until 100,000 men were playing the same impossible song.
Mine's the burials. Strip away the movie and the real center of it was two enemies agreeing the dead came first. That's the part I won't forget.
If you walked in certain and you're leaving curious, that's the whole job. Subscribe and take the rest of this war in order with us. Each chapter we make quietly rewrites the one before it. Here's the one we genuinely can't settle for you. If you'd been in that trench 30 yards from the enemy on Christmas morning, and someone climbed out unarmed and waved you over, would you have climbed out too? Be honest and tell us why in the comments. This is Nora, and I'll leave you with this. The men in the mud found the peace themselves. It took an entire war machine to take it back. Thanks for watching and signing off.
Nora, that belongs in the highlight reel. 9 out of 10. This is Professor Erica. Thanks for watching and signing off.